Have you ever imagined, on your wedding day, the man you love most suddenly disappears? Amid the music, under the pitying stares of everyone around, you stand there in your white dress, hands trembling, heart shattered. But just as your world is falling apart, a stranger steps forward, holds out his hand, and says, "I need a woman, and you need a home." And she takes his hand, unaware that from that moment on, a marriage born out of an agreement would lead them on a journey of healing, love, and rediscovery. This isn't just a love story. It's the story of three souls: a man afraid to love, a woman who's been broken, and a child searching for a family. It all begins on a rainy afternoon in Savannah. And you, if you've ever believed that love only comes from destiny, might think differently after this story. If you've ever stood before a dream and watched it shatter, you'll understand how Zoe Carter felt that day in the soft golden afternoon of June in Savannah, Georgia. It wasn't thunder or wind that chilled the air, but silence. That dreadful silence when hundreds of people all turned to look in one direction at the bride, standing alone before the altar. The white wedding dress Zoe had once dreamed of now felt heavy, soaked in sweat. The church lights shimmered against the lace, reflecting the tears she struggled to swallow back. The officiant Reverend Collins glanced at his watch for the third time, then lowered his head and spoke gently. "Miss Carter, it's been 15 minutes. Perhaps we should—" "Just 5 more minutes," Zoe said, her voice trembling. She tried to manage a fragile smile. "He'll come." But everyone knew no one was late to their wedding unless they didn't intend to come. From the third row, her mother, Lorraine, shook her head softly. "Zoe, honey, don't hurt yourself anymore." She didn't hear, or couldn't. Every sound faded beneath the pounding of her heart. The eyes surrounding her were full of pity, curiosity, judgment. The whispers dimmed, but the quieter they were, the deeper they cut. Poor thing. Did Garrett really leave her? She's so beautiful, though. Each word pricked like a needle. Zoe felt trapped inside that white dress made of illusion, of misplaced faith. She didn't cry. She couldn't. The heavy church doors burst open, wind rushing in, carrying the scent of rain and damp wood. A man walked in. Not Garrett, not a lover arriving late. A stranger, tall, in a perfectly tailored black suit, shoes polished to a mirror shine, face calm and unreadable amid the chaos. He walked straight down the aisle as if the ceremony were his. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass, painting his face sharp, cold, like steel. Zoe turned, her red, swollen eyes meeting his silver-gray chaser. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "Who are you?" The man stopped at the altar, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "I'm Daniel Whitmore," he said slowly, clearly, each word chosen carefully. "And I believe we can help each other." Zoe let out a shaky, bitter laugh. "Help each other? You need a way out of this nightmare." His eyes flicked toward the watching crowd. "And I need a wife." She thought she misheard. What did you just say?" "I need a woman, a home, a family at least on paper." He inclined his head slightly. "And you, clearly, need a safer place than this." Zoe gave a faint, incredulous laugh. "I don't know who you are. I don't know what you want." "You know," he said evenly, "men don't show up at churches in suits just to comfort strangers." In the light, she noticed something imperfect in his eyes, a trace of weariness, of loneliness. "You're insane." "Maybe," he replied. "But if I'm insane, at least I act on it." Thunder rolled outside like a signal marking the end of something old. Zoe looked around her mother, bowing her head, her best friend crying quietly, and all those pitying eyes weaving together like a net around her heart. Garrett wasn't coming. Love was dead. And before her stood a stranger offering her a way out. "Suppose I agree," she said hoarsely. "What happens next?" "We leave here, go to the Chatham County Courthouse, sign the papers. You'll be Zoe Whitmore before sundown." "You say that like it's nothing." "For someone who's lost everything," he said, meeting her eyes. "Nothing small except the chance to start over." Zoe looked at his outstretched hand, a hand that belonged to someone used to control cold, but steady, firmer than any promise she'd ever heard. At that moment, she realized that some choices aren't made with reason but with the instinct to survive. She placed her hand in his. The whispers ceased. The church held its breath. Daniel spoke up, his voice echoing through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, there's been a slight change. The wedding will proceed, only the groom has changed." The room erupted in murmurs. Reverend Collins stood frozen. "Do you have a marriage license?" "Not yet," Daniel said calmly, "but I will in an hour." Zoe suddenly laughed, not out of joy, but because her despair had somehow turned into reckless courage. She turned to the Reverend and whispered, "Pray for us, Father. If God is watching, maybe he could use some entertainment today." Laughter mixed with tears, and as they walked out the great doors, the last rays of sunlight fell across her face, half pain, half release. Savannah seemed to hold its breath, watching the bride step out hand in hand with a stranger. Daniel's car sped through oak-lined streets, moss swaying gently in the wind. Zoe sat in the passenger seat, clutching her wilted bouquet, her mind drifting like a dream. "You can still change your mind," Daniel said quietly. "We haven't signed anything yet. Can you pull over?" Zoe asked softly. He stopped by the roadside, waiting in silence. Zoe turned to him. "Why me? You could have chosen anyone in this city. Why a bride who's just been left behind?" Daniel kept his eyes on the road ahead, his voice deliberate. "Because you stayed standing, Carter. While everyone pitied you, you held your head high. I need someone like that, not to love but to stand beside." Zoe smiled faintly, unsure if it was a compliment or a calculated choice. "And you? Why do you need a wife?" "For a child," he said after a pause. "My niece, Evangeline. She lost her parents, and someone's trying to take her away. The court trusts a man with a family more than one alone." Zoe looked out the window, raindrops streaking down like lines of memory. "So, I'm just a legal solution." Daniel's reply was soft. "No. You're the only person I believe could make a child feel safe." The words stilled her heart. They arrived at the courthouse. The air smelled of old coffee and paper. The clerk glanced at them, skeptical, but handed over the marriage license. Zoe signed with trembling hands. Daniel signed neatly, decisively. One paper, two signatures. Two lives are taking an unexpected turn. When they stepped outside, the rain had truly begun. Daniel held the umbrella for her, but Zoe tilted her face up, letting the rain wash over her. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "No," she said firmly, more than she expected of herself. "I've already lost everything. And you? Do you?" Daniel smiled faintly, the first smile she'd seen. "I've never believed in fate, but today, maybe I'll start trying." They drove silently as rain drummed against the roof like 1,000 quiet sorrows. Savannah glowed under streetlights, the old streets glistening gold through the mist. Zoe gazed ahead where black iron gates appeared, opening to a winding path lined with ancient oaks. "Is that your home?" she asked softly. "No," Daniel said, eyes on the road. "It's our home." The gates of the Whitmore estate opened, warm lights spilling out like a scene from a film. Zoe tightened her hold on the dying bouquet. She didn't know what awaited her, love, pain, or only empty rooms. But one thing was sure, her old life was over, and a brand new chapter had just begun. After the rain, Savannah carries a scent like no other: damp moss, aged wood, and the faint trace of sea breeze from afar. As the car rolled past the iron gates of the Whitmore estate, Zoe still couldn't quite believe that the man sitting beside her was now, legally, her husband. No music, no fireworks, only the rhythmic sound of the wipers and the chill seeping through the thin fabric of her wedding dress. Daniel stopped the car at the front steps. The mansion stood tall in the mist, golden light glowing softly behind glass windows. Its grandeur was almost intimidating. "Welcome home," he said, stepping out first. Zoe lingered a few seconds, wondering why her heart was beating so fast. She lifted her dress and stepped into the cool night air, the damp lace clinging to her wrist. An older woman with neatly pinned silver hair opened the door. "Sir," she greeted softly, then turned toward Zoe. "And, ma'am." The word ma'am sounded foreign, like something that didn't belong to her. Zoe hesitated, but Daniel only nodded. "This is Mrs. Serafina, the Whitmore housekeeper. She knows this place better than I do." Serafina smiled gently, her eyes warm with motherly kindness. "Welcome, Mrs. Whitmore. Your room is ready. Mr. Daniel said you're free to choose any room you like." Zoe nodded in thanks, glancing around the grand foyer. Every antique piece, every 19th century painting seemed to whisper stories of power, history, and a life she had never been part of. "This house is so quiet," she murmured. "I like silence," Daniel replied. "Silence or loneliness?" He didn't answer. He only loosened his tie, set it on a chair, and motioned for her to sit. "We should make a few things clear," he began. Zoe sat across from him, fingers interlaced. "First, this is a legal marriage, but not one built on affection. I don't expect you to play the perfect wife, and I don't need you to pretend to love me. All I ask is your presence as a partner in appearance." She gave a soft laugh, shaking her head. "Sounds more like a lease agreement." "Almost," he said, leaning slightly forward. "I'll take care of every expense. You'll have everything you need. In return, you stay here with me and my niece until the custody case is settled." Zoe was silent for a long time, and after that, "If you choose to leave, I'll ensure you have enough to start over anywhere you wish." Part of her wanted to get up and walk away, but another part, the tired, wounded one, just wanted a place to breathe. "You think I'll agree just for money?" "No," Daniel said, his tone softer. "Because I think you need a safe place to find yourself again." The words caught in her throat. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Silence stretched between them, the ticking clock steady like a heartbeat. Finally, she asked, "What's the child's name?" "Evangeline. But everyone calls her Eva." "How old is she?" 8. "Smart, quiet, afraid of thunder, and doesn't trust strangers." "Like you?" Daniel raised an eyebrow, and Zoe realized she'd said that last part out loud. He didn't react, just gave a faint smile, then stood. "Mrs. Serafina will show you the rooms. I have some matters to handle. Dinner is at 7. As he walked away, Zoe watched his tall frame, strong, disciplined, but his steps carried the weight of someone long accustomed to solitude. Mrs. Serafina led her upstairs. The hallway stretched endlessly, lined with blue carpets and windows overlooking a garden of blooming roses. "Mr. Daniel is a good man," Serafina said quietly, "but his heart has been asleep for a long time. Don't wake it unless you plan to stay." The words lingered like prophecy. Zoe smiled faintly and nodded. Her room was warm and calm. A cup of warm milk sat on the bedside table. Someone had thought of her comfort. She sat on the edge of the bed, slipped off her wedding shoes, and exhaled deeply for the first time that day. She was no longer the abandoned bride. She was Mrs. Daniel Whitmore, at least on paper, and somewhere under this roof, an 8-year-old girl was waiting to learn how to trust again. Zoe closed her eyes, listening to the wind through the oaks. For the first time in years, her tears came not from pain but from a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, God was giving her another chance. Dinner at the Whitmore mansion felt more like an interview than a meal. A long, white-clothed table, candles flickering, 3 people sitting so far apart they had to raise their voices to be heard. Zoe at one end, Daniel in the middle, and a small girl with soft golden curls at the far end, Evangeline. The child didn't look up. She focused on her plate, hands trembling slightly as she handled the silverware. "Eva," Daniel said gently, "this is Miss Zoe." Zoe smiled, kind and calm. "Hi, sweetheart." The girl only nodded, saying nothing. The air grew tense. Daniel set down his fork, voice low but firm. "We have a guest, Eva. You should." "It's okay," Zoe interrupted. "I don't like being forced to talk while eating, either." Daniel glanced at her, surprised by her softness. Zoe turned back to Eva, speaking lightly, as if telling a story. "When I was your age, I never spoke to strangers either. My mom used to say quiet people listen to the world with their hearts." Eva looked up briefly, her grey-blue eyes meeting Zoe's. There was something there faint, fragile like recognition. Dinner passed peacefully after that. Later, Daniel walked Zoe out to the garden. Moonlight filtered through the oak branches, scattering silver patterns on the ground. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for not pushing her." "No one likes being pushed," Zoe replied, "especially children who've lost something." He looked at her for a long moment, his gaze softening. You understand them quickly. I'm a teacher, remember? What kind of teacher marries a stranger in a single day? Zoe smiled, tilting her head. Maybe one who's learning how to teach herself again. They stood in silence. From afar, crickets sang, blending with the faint rush of the river. Savannah nights were a strange mix of loneliness and peace. Zoe, Daniel said finally, I know this is unusual, but I promise, I'll respect you. I don't want this marriage to feel like a burden. She nodded gently. I don't need promises, just truth. Truth is harder than promises, he said quietly. But I'll try. They stood there, not touching, not staring yet. Something invisible stretched between them, thin but real. When Zoe returned to her room, she found a small note on the table. If you need anything, call me. D. Beside it, a cup of jasmine tea was still steaming. She lifted it to her lips, smiling faintly. Outside, the night rain began again, soft, steady, like a lullaby for two lost souls who had finally found a fragile peace. Morning sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the Savannah mansion, bathing the expansive room in gold. Zoe woke to the unfamiliar scent of aged wood, the faint trace of jasmine tea, and the soft chirping of birds outside the garden. A new day and a life completely different from the one before. She slipped into a simple cotton dress, tied her hair, and looked at her reflection. The woman in the mirror was no longer a forsaken bride. She was someone learning to live with the name Mrs. Daniel Whitmore. It still sounded strange, like a role she hadn't quite memorized. A gentle knock on the door. Mrs. Serafina's voice floated in, calm as a breeze. Breakfast is ready, Miss Zoe. Zoe smiled, descending the stairs. The air carried the warmth of freshly baked bread and the aroma of coffee. Daniel was already there, reading the paper, a cup beside him. He wore a white shirt, no tie, softer, more human than the cold CEO she'd met the day before. Good morning, Zoe said quietly. He looked up and nodded. Good morning. Eva's in the garden. She likes to eat out there. Through the glass doors, Zoe saw the rose garden behind the house, a little girl sitting on a wooden swing, back turned, golden hair glinting under the sunday. A glass of milk and an open book rested on the small table beside her. She's still uncomfortable with strangers, Daniel said, as if reading Zoe's thoughts. You don't need to try too hard. Zoe smiled faintly. I'm not trying. I want to say good morning. She stepped out into the sunlight. The swing creaked softly, blending with the song of birds. Eva didn't turn around, just swayed gently. Hi there, Zoe said warmly. Mind if I sit with you? No reply. Zoe didn't push. She sat on the chair beside her, gently flipping open the book Eva had been reading, Anne of Green Gables. I love this one too, Zoe said. Anne believes everything has a soul, even apple trees. Eva glanced up, her silver-grey eyes meeting Zoe's momentarily before looking away. What's your favorite part? The girl asked in a voice as light as wind. Zoe smiled. The part where Anne says, there's no happiness except inside our own hearts, if only we're willing to open them. Eva didn't respond, but a small flicker of light appeared in her eyes. The air between them softened. Zoe told her a few stories from her old classroom about mischievous students and a cat named Pepper who always hid under her desk. Eva giggled, a short, shy sound, but genuine. You're a teacher? Eva asked. Yes, 3rd grade. Your age. Did your school have roses too? It did, but not as beautiful as these. Eva twirled on the swing. Mom loved roses, too. Grandma says she planted these. Zoe stayed quiet, hearing the tremble in the girl's voice. She must have been wonderful, Zoe said softly. Eva nodded. She used to sing when it rained. She looked up at the bright sky and added, almost to herself, nobody sings now. Zoe's heart ached. Well, she said gently, next time it rains, we'll sing together. Nobody should have to sing alone. Eva looked at her long and hard, as if testing whether Zoe truly meant it. Then she nodded. Okay. From the doorway, Daniel watched silently. In the sunlight, Zoe and Eva sat side by side in the garden, 2 shades of hair, golden and brown, glowing together. He realized the house echoed with laughter for the first time in years, and that sound stirred something deep inside him. By afternoon, the Savannah sky had turned amber. Zoe brought an old book and a plate of homemade cookies to the garden. Eva was coloring at her little table and smiled when she saw Zoe. "You like purple?" Zoe asked, noticing the carefully shaded flowers. "Because Mom said purple is the color of memories," Eva replied. "And you?" "I like blue," Zoe said. "It feels like a promise that the sky always returns after every storm." Eva smiled and handed her the page. "Keep it. It's a rose of memories." Zoe took the paper, warmth blooming quietly in her chest. "Thank you, Eva." That evening, Daniel came home late. As he passed the living room, he heard soft laughter from the kitchen, a sound this house hadn't known in far too long. He stopped in the doorway. Zoe was there, hair tied up, sleeves rolled, showing Eva how to bake cookies. "Not too fast, Eva, or the dough won't rise." "Like people," Zoe laughed. "Exactly. If we rush through life, our hearts never get the chance to grow." Daniel couldn't help but smile. He stepped forward, voice low and warm. "Is there a share for me?" Eva squealed and ran to him, wrapping her arms around his leg. "You're home." It was the first time Zoe heard the girl's voice sound that alive. "Miss Zoe makes the best cookies," Eva said, holding one up. "You have to try." Daniel took it, his eyes meeting Zoe's across the room. "Thank you," he said softly, and he meant it. Zoe smiled. "Next time, you can help with the dishes." "Our marriage agreement didn't include that clause," he replied, serious but with a hint of a grin. Eva giggled. "You should add it." That night, they sat closer at dinner. Eva spoke more, Zoe laughed more, and Daniel, though mostly silent, looked at them differently. When Mrs. Serafina led Eva upstairs to bed, Zoe stepped out to the veranda. The night breeze carried the scent of roses. Daniel joined her, holding 2 cups of tea. "Thank you for today," he said. "For the cookies? For making Eva laugh." Zoe looked at him, eyes glimmering in the moonlight. "When a child laughs, the world feels a little brighter." "Maybe," he said softly. "I'd forgotten what that sounded like." They stood in quiet stillness, the chirp of crickets, the whisper of the wind. Zoe finally said, "That little girl is healing both of us, Daniel." He turned to her, his voice low. "Maybe you are too." In that moment, words weren't needed. A once cold man felt warmth returning to his chest. A woman once broken began to believe that love in its gentlest form might still exist. And the wind chimes swayed softly somewhere in the garden, a small, silver promise beneath the Savannah night. Savannah was made for rain at the end of July. Storms swept in from the Gulf of Mexico, sudden, wild, and furious, as if the sky was pouring out its heart. That afternoon, as the wind began to whistle through the windows and thunder tore across the clouds, Zoe taught Eva how to draw in the living room. Outside, the rain pounded harder and harder, each drop drumming fiercely against the glass. Lightning flashed, flooding the room with blinding light before plunging it back into shadow. Eva flinched, clutching her worn teddy bear tight. "Miss Zoe, I hate thunder." Zoe smiled softly and drew the girl close. "It's okay, sweetheart. Thunder is just the earth crying." Eva blinked. "Crying?" "Yes." Zoe brushed a strand of hair from her face. "When the earth is sad because people forget how to love, it cries as rain. And when it misses those who are gone, it thunders to remind us they can still hear." Eva fell silent, then whispered, "Do you think Mama can hear me?" Zoe smiled gently. "If you call her, she'll hear you for sure." Another flash split the sky. Eva trembled. Zoe wrapped her arms tighter around the girl, holding her close the way a mother might have her child. Outside, the storm raged harder. The wind howled through the oaks, and the rain struck the windows like desperate knocking. Daniel burst through the doorway, his shirt darkened with rain, tension in every line of his face. He'd just returned from the office, unaware the storm had rolled in so fast. "Zoe," he called. "You and Eva." He stopped short at the sight before him. Zoe sat on the sofa, Eva asleep in her arms, and the little girl was still holding her teddy bear. Zoe looked up and whispered. She fell asleep. I told her a story, and she calmed down. Daniel stood frozen, watching them. The sight was simple, yet something heavy stirred in his chest. He stepped closer, voice low. "She's never slept through a storm. Since the accident, every thunderclap keeps her awake all night." Zoe raised a finger to her lips, nodding toward the sleeping child. "She's dreaming now," she murmured. Daniel sank into the chair across from her, hands clasped. "I don't know how to help her," he said quietly, his voice rough. "The doctors tell me not to force her to remember, not to push too hard, but I feel useless." Zoe's voice was soft. "Sometimes you don't have to fix things, just be there." He watched the small hand gripping Zoe's sleeve. "How did you do it?" he asked. "I told her a story called Earth Tears. I used to think children were the ones afraid of storms, but maybe it's the grown-ups, because grown-ups forget that rain is just tears." Daniel lifted his gaze. "Do you believe that?" "Not entirely," she said with a faint smile. "But believing in something beautiful helps us survive." Another thunderclap flashed. Eva stirred, and Zoe gently soothed her back to sleep. Daniel leaned forward to pull the blanket higher, his movements careful, tender. Then his eyes met Zoe's, and neither spoke. Zoe saw light in Daniel's grey eyes for the first time, faint, fragile, but real. And Daniel saw in her something he hadn't felt in years: peace. Outside, the thunder faded. Zoe whispered, "The storm will pass soon." In Savannah, everything wild only comes to remind us that after it's gone, the sky shines clearer. Daniel nodded. "Just like people, right?" "Yes," she said softly. "Except people are sometimes too afraid of storms to open the door for the sun again." He fell quiet, lost in thought. As the rain eased, they sat there, two strangers sharing an unexpected calm. That night, after Eva was fast asleep, Zoe stood by the living room window. The rain had softened to a drizzle, the scent of damp roses drifting in. Through the glass, she could see the faint glow from Daniel's study. She walked over and knocked gently. "Come in," his voice answered, low and tired. The room was large, lined with books, and papers were scattered across the desk. Daniel looked up, weary, but composed. "You're still awake?" "I couldn't sleep," Zoe said. "I wanted to thank you for coming home in time. Eva needed you here." He gave a faint smile. "Maybe she needed you more." Zoe hesitated, then spoke softly. "When I held her, I remembered myself at her age. I was afraid of thunder, too. Thought my mom had disappeared in a storm. She hadn't just gone away." Daniel set his pen down. "Your mother's gone? She passed when I was 14. On a night just like this." Silence filled the room. The ticking clock echoed softly. Daniel stood, walking to the window. "I promised my brother I'd care for his daughter if anything ever happened. That day, I was driving just 10 minutes behind them. The crash happened right before my eyes. I couldn't save anyone." His voice cracked at the end, though his face stayed steady. Zoe said nothing, just stood beside him, watching the rain. "You can't keep blaming yourself," she murmured. "Sometimes the only way to honor them is to live so they can rest." He turned toward her. Her face was calm in the warm light, kind, real. "You make it sound easy," he whispered. "It's not," she said, "but it's necessary." A breeze slipped through the crack in the window, stirring the curtain. Zoe approached the desk and picked up a tilted photo frame, Daniel holding a toddler Eva beside his late brother. "They look alike," she said softly. "But Eva's eyes, they're yours. I just hope she doesn't carry my pain." "She won't," Zoe said. "She's learning to smile again. And maybe you should too." Daniel laughed, the first real laugh she'd heard from him, tired but warm. "I've forgotten how." "Then let me teach you." They looked at each other, not touching, not speaking, yet something gentle passed between them. Zoe turned away first, picking up the tea from his desk. "Get some rest, Daniel. Tomorrow will be sunny." As she stepped out, light from the hallway framed her shoulders in a soft glow. Daniel watched her go, and a thought crossed his mind. Maybe her arrival wasn't by chance. That night, he stayed up long after the rain stopped, listening to the quiet outside. In the next room, Zoe slept with Eva curled against her, peace finally settling in their breaths. Outside, the Georgia sky cleared, and inside the Whitmore mansion, the only sound left was the steady rhythm of 3 hearts once broken, now learning to beat in harmony. The early August morning in Savannah was unnervingly clear. Zoe woke early, walking down the quiet hall, when she heard Daniel's low, tense, sharp voice from his study. "No, I need that report before Friday." We have to win the custody case, understand? She's already signed. She froze. She's already signed. The words dropped like a stone into still water. Signed what? The scrape of a chair jolted her, and she hurried away, her heart pounding. Later, after breakfast, when Daniel and Eva left the house, Zoe returned to the study. The door was half open. Sunlight cut across the oak desk, illuminating an open folder. On the cover, Whitmore versus Blake, custody case. She hadn't meant to look, but her eyes stopped on one page that read, "The marriage of Daniel Whitmore and Zoe Carter will reinforce the image of a stable family, increasing the likelihood of a favorable custody ruling." At the bottom, Daniel's signature. The world went silent. Zoe stood there, hearing her heartbeat shatter like glass. So that was it. This marriage, this strange, impossible beginning, wasn't fate. It was a strategy. Every look, every word, every moment of warmth she'd started to believe in, had it all been part of a carefully planned move? Zoe gave a soft, bitter laugh. Of course. He had told her from the start it was an agreement, but she had been foolish enough to think something real had grown between them. That afternoon, Daniel returned. He found her standing on the porch, eyes distant. "You didn't go out?" he asked. She turned to him, her voice calm, too calm. "I read something in your study." Daniel stopped mid-step. "You shouldn't read, or shouldn't know." Silence. Zoe smiled faintly, tears spilling without her permission. "You used me to win your case, didn't you?" Daniel exhaled, his tone low. "Zoe, please listen." "No, you listen." Her voice cracked. "You could have told me the truth from the start. I'm not a child. I could have handled it. But instead, you let me believe. You cared. You think I didn't. You signed that marriage paper like it was a business contract. You needed a woman to make your record look clean. So what am I, Daniel? A prop for your image?" He didn't answer. The wind rustled through the trees, the only sound between them. Zoe wiped her face, her voice hoarse. "I don't know which hurt worse, being abandoned at the altar, or being used in a marriage built on lies." Daniel stepped closer, voice soft but firm. "Yes, it started because of the case. I won't deny that. I needed you. But, Zoe, do you really think a man like me would rush home every night to hear a child laugh if nothing had changed?" Zoe looked at him, torn between anger and something more profound. "You sound sincere," she said quietly, "but I don't know what's real anymore." Daniel reached out to touch her shoulder, but she stepped back. "Don't," she whispered. "I need time." He nodded slowly. "I understand, but please don't leave. Not for me. For Eva." The name stilled her. She inhaled deeply, looking away. "I'll stay. For the child, but not for you." Zoe walked back into the house, leaving Daniel alone on the porch as rain began to fall, a storm, not in the sky this time, but in both their hearts. The following days, the Whitmore mansion sank back into its old silence. Breakfasts were quiet. Zoe and Daniel sat across from each other but barely spoke. Eva sensed the shift, her young eyes clouded with confusion. Children always know when love stops, or when it never truly began. At night, Zoe and Eva made pressed flower journals together. The girls smiled, then asked softly, "Miss Zoe, why doesn't Uncle Daniel eat dinner with us anymore?" Zoe forced a smile. "He's just busy, sweetheart." Eva tilted her head. "He's sad." Zoe blinked. "How do you know?" "Because he looks out the window the same way you do. And when grown-ups look in the same direction, they miss each other." Zoe couldn't find the words. She pulled the child close and held her tight. That night, after Eva fell asleep, Zoe walked down the moonlit hallway. She stopped in front of Daniel's study. The light was still on. She knocked softly. "Come in," his voice answered, deep, tired. Daniel sat behind his desk, shirt unbuttoned at the collar, a glass of whiskey in hand. Files were stacked high beside him. "You're not asleep?" he asked. "I can't," Zoe said quietly. "Because of me?" "Because of everything." He set the glass down, his eyes meeting hers, weary but sincere. "Zoe, I'm sorry. I planned it. I was selfish, but I never meant to hurt you." "You don't need to apologize," she said, her tone steady. You just did what you do best, control everything. Daniel gave a sad smile. Do you hate me? No. I hate myself for thinking I could heal someone who might not even want to be healed. He stepped closer, voice low, trembling slightly. Zoe, I didn't know what love was until you walked in. And if this isn't love, then whatever it is, it's the first thing that's made me want to be a better man. Zoe stared at him for a long moment. Don't say things you're unsure of, she said softly. Sometimes compassion and love are separated by a single lie. He didn't reply. They stood between the warm light and the ache of what could never be. Then Zoe turned, her voice barely a whisper. I'll stay, but from now on, don't call this a marriage. We're just two people sharing a house for a child. She walked out, leaving Daniel alone in the glow of the desk lamp. He looked down at a framed photo of Eva, his hand brushing over the glass. For her, he murmured, and for you. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance, but no one was afraid anymore. Because every storm carries a lesson. Loving someone isn't the most challenging part. Trusting them is. Savannah was warm and damp that afternoon, the air that made people dream about the past. Zoe was rearranging books in the living room when the doorbell rang. Mrs. Serafina came from the kitchen, opened the door, then turned back with a faint look of confusion. Miss Zoe, a visitor is asking for you. Zoe looked up and froze. A voice she knew too well drifted in from the porch. Zoe. Garrett Monroe stood in a navy suit, his hair neatly combed, his smile as polished as ever. But once warm, his eyes now carried a flicker of guilt wrapped in charm. Garrett. Zoe took a step back. How did you find me? He shrugged lightly. Savannah's not that big. Word travels fast about a bride left at the altar who married the Whitmore heir. His voice made the room suddenly colder. Zoe crossed her arms. What do you want? To apologize. He stepped closer, lowering his gaze. Zoe, I know I was wrong. I panicked. I've never been sure of anything in my life, until I lost you. Zoe gave a soft, bitter laugh. You call walking away from me at the altar panic? Garrett said nothing. Maybe I didn't deserve you, but it kills me knowing you're with someone else. You have no right to feel anything, she said quietly. She turned to leave, but he caught her wrist. Zoe, I just want to talk. She yanked free, her voice firm. Let go, Garrett. You had your chance. Footsteps echoed from the hallway. Daniel appeared at the doorway, sleeves rolled, white shirt crisp, his gaze sharp as steel. Is there a problem here? Garrett turned, managing an awkward smile. You must be the new husband. Daniel didn't answer. He walked up beside Zoe, calm, deliberate, as if drawing a quiet line between them. Garrett smirked faintly. I just came to say a few personal words. Didn't know she needed a bodyguard. Before Zoe could speak, Daniel replied, his tone measured, but cold enough to slice through the air. She doesn't need protection. I'm here because I'm her husband. Silence fell heavy between the three. Garrett's smile faltered. Confident, aren't you? I heard this marriage happened rather suddenly. That's none of your concern, Daniel said, eyes locked on him. She's my wife, and she always will be. Zoe turned toward Daniel, startled by the quiet conviction in his voice, not loud, not angry, but utterly confident. Garrett's gaze hardened. Zoe, are you pleased, or just running away? Maybe both, she said softly. But either way, I'm better off than being left standing alone in a church. The words hit him like a slap. He looked down, exhaling. I just wanted to see you once more, he murmured. If I could go back to that day. But you can't, Zoe interrupted calmly, and I don't want you to. Daniel stepped forward and opened the door. Have a good afternoon, Mr. Monroe. Garrett hesitated, his eyes flicking between them, regret and bitterness mingling. I hope you know what you're doing, Zoe. For the first time in my life, she said quietly, I think I do. The door shut. The garden outside swayed with a faint breeze, rose petals trembling in the light. Neither of them spoke for a while. Finally, Zoe let out a breath. You didn't have to do that. Daniel's voice was low. I didn't do it for you. I did it because no man talks to my wife that way. She blinked. Were you? Jealous? He held her gaze for a long moment. Maybe. And if that's what it was, I can live with it. Zoe gave a soft, incredulous laugh. You're impossible to read. He shrugged. I'm just being honest. Outside, Savannah slipped into twilight. The sunset spilled red and gold across the rose garden, casting a glow on their faces, two people caught between past and present, fear and faith. That night, Zoe couldn't sleep. She lay awake, listening to the gentle rain tapping against the roof, the first since the storm. Garrett's face lingered in her mind, along with Daniel's steady eyes, and the tangled ache between pride and longing. She rose, pulled on a sweater, and went downstairs for water. The living room lights were still on. Daniel sat there, shirt slightly undone, with a glass of red wine. "You're still up?" she asked softly. He turned, smiling faintly. "Couldn't sleep. I don't like the silence after a storm." She sat across from him. The warm light wrapped them in quiet stillness. "Garrett hurt you badly, didn't he?" Daniel asked, his gaze fixed on the floor. "Not just hurt," she said. "He made me lose faith in love, promises, everything. I didn't think I'd ever trust anyone again." Daniel nodded slowly. "And yet, for a while, you trusted me." "Maybe I wanted to," Zoe said. "I'm tired of being afraid." Silence lingered. Daniel set down his glass. "I never wanted to hurt you, Zoe. And today, yes, I was jealous. Not of your past, but because I'm afraid you'll walk away too one day, just like he did." Zoe looked at him, startled. This man once claimed he didn't believe in love, now quietly confessing fear. "Daniel," she said gently, "I don't know what we are, but when you stood by me today, I felt safe. I haven't felt that way in a long time." He smiled faintly. "Then maybe we're exactly where we're supposed to be." Zoe turned toward the window. Rain shimmered in the dim light, reflecting gold on the floor. "Do you think people can ever start over?" she asked. "No one truly starts over," Daniel said. "We just learn to keep going with scars that hurt a little less each day." They shared a look, quiet and unspoken, the air soft with understanding. Zoe lifted her glass and gently clinked it against his. "To those who keep going," she said. "And to those who stay," he replied. The sound was slight, tender, a promise made without words. When Zoe rose to leave, Daniel's hand brushed hers, his voice low and sincere. "Thank you for being here." She nodded, then climbed the stairs. Halfway up, she turned back. Daniel sat alone in the lamp's glow, eyes closed, a weary smile ghosting his lips. Zoe knew the past had come knocking tonight, but she wouldn't run this time. Outside, the Savannah rain kept falling gentle, steady, washing away the footprints of the man who left, leaving only the present behind. And in that quiet moment, two hearts once broken were quietly finding their way home. Monday morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains of the Whitmore mansion, spilling a soft golden hue across the wooden floor. Zoe was sipping her coffee in the reading room when Mrs. Serafina entered, holding a magazine without hesitation. "You might want to see this, Miss Zoe." There was a trace of worry, almost guilt, in her voice. Zoe took the glossy magazine, her eyes stopping on the cover. Charleston Society, the South's most perfect couples. In the center was a photo of Daniel, elegant in a black tuxedo, holding hands with a tall, blonde woman with striking, confident eyes. "Isadora Blackwell," the caption read. Below it, "Fashion entrepreneur, longtime partner of businessman Daniel Whitmore. Sources say an engagement announcement is imminent." The photo had been taken 8 months ago, 3 months before Daniel walked into Zoe's ruined wedding. The coffee cup trembled in Zoe's hand. A drop of heat slipped down her wrist. The cup fell and shattered on the floor. Mrs. Serafina gasped. "Miss Zoe." Zoe smiled faintly, crouching to pick up the shards. "It's fine. I was just surprised." Serafina placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Don't let society gossip shake you, dear. Everyone here can see Mr. Daniel looks at you differently than he's ever looked at anyone." But Zoe said nothing. Her eyes lingered on the photo, on Isadora's poised smile. Her tilt of confidence, and a dull ache bloomed in her chest. So he had loved someone, and she was the woman he once intended to marry. That evening, Daniel came home late. Dinner was already served, though Zoe sat alone at the table. Candlelight shimmered off the rim of her untouched wine glass. Daniel walked in, loosening his tie. "Sorry, the meeting went longer than expected." Zoe didn't look at him. She slid the magazine toward him. "I found this interesting." He froze. After a long silence, he said quietly, "That's old. The press is always slower than the truth." "Old?" Zoe's tone was calm, cutting. "Because it was taken 8 months ago, or because it only took you 3 months to find another bride?" Her voice didn't rise, but it sliced clean. Daniel exhaled slowly. "Zoe, I didn't hide it to deceive you. I just didn't know how to explain. Didn't know how." She gave a shaky laugh. "You always know how, Daniel. You know when to plan a marriage, when to stay silent, when to sign a deal, and apparently, when to love." He clenched his hands slightly. "Isadora is part of my past. She has no place here anymore. But she was your fiancée." "Yes." "And you loved her." "Yes." "Then what am I?" The air thickened heavy, suffocating. Zoe gave a small, broken laugh. "I just wonder, if your brother hadn't died, if there was no custody battle, would I ever have appeared in your life?" Daniel stepped closer. "Zoe, don't do this." "Do what?" "Punish me for my past." She looked up at him, tears slipping, but her eyes brightened. "No, Daniel. I'm trying to understand if you would have chosen me without being forced to." He stopped. He didn't answer, and his silence was precisely the answer she feared most. Zoe nodded slowly. "Thank you for being honest." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Zoe," she paused, "I didn't choose you because I had to. I chose you because I wanted to. I didn't realize it until it was almost too late." Zoe turned back, eyes shining in the flickering candlelight. "Then prove it." Not with words, with the courage to let go of what came before. She walked upstairs, leaving him in the dim room. Daniel sat down, staring at the crimson swirl in his glass. In the reflection on the window, he saw himself tired, lonely, and for the first time in his life, not in control. 3 days later, Isadora arrived. Zoe and Eva were baking cookies when a sleek engine echoed outside. A tall blonde woman stepped out of a silver sports car, heels clicking against the driveway. Mrs. Serafina opened the door. "Miss Blackwell." Zoe froze, wiping flour from her hands. Isadora looked her over from head to toe, her smile polite, eyes sharp. "You must be Zoe, the new Mrs. Whitmore." "That's right. You're more intriguing than I imagined," Isadora said with a small, poised smile. "But you look tired." Zoe didn't answer. "I came to collect a few things Daniel never returned. Photos, papers, gifts. Is he home?" "No, but I can help." "You?" Isadora chuckled lightly. "We lived here once, you know." The words sliced clean. Zoe kept her tone steady. "I know, but I also know you left and he stayed." For a brief second, Isadora's smile faltered. "I don't like being replaced. Then you'll hate the feeling of being forgotten even more." The air cooled instantly. Isadora straightened, eyes narrowing, then gave a dismissive shrug. She turned and left, her perfume trailing behind like smoke. Zoe stood in the doorway, heart pounding, but her eyes were dry. That night, Daniel returned. "She came," Zoe said simply. He froze. "Isadora?" "Yes. She said she used to live here." Daniel met her gaze. "She did. But she left and I didn't stop her. You're here now, and I won't lose you." Zoe's voice was quiet. "You once said that line to her, didn't you?" "Maybe," he admitted. "But tonight, I say it to you. And this time, I mean it." For once, Zoe didn't answer. She stepped closer and placed a hand over his chest, feeling the steady, unguarded rhythm beneath her palm. "Then prove it," she whispered. "Not in words, but in actions. Make me believe." He nodded. "I will." Outside, the Savannah moonlight poured over the rose garden. The wind carried the mingled scent of sweetness and rain, the fragrance of a past finally fading, making room for something new, fragile, and frighteningly real. September arrived, and Savannah began to shift its colors. The oak trees along Whitaker Road turned golden, their leaves tumbling in the wind. The Whitmore house felt peaceful, so still that Zoe almost believed every storm had passed. But storms never send warnings. That morning, while she was preparing breakfast, the doorbell rang. Mrs. Serafina opened it, and a woman stepped inside, gray blazer, hair neatly tied, a thick folder in her hands. Her voice was polite, steady, but cold. "Good morning. I'm Melinda Green, case officer for the Georgia Department of Child Welfare." Zoe froze. Daniel, descending the staircase, immediately stiffened. "Miss Green," he said carefully, "I thought our appointment was next week." "It was," she replied, "but we've received conflicting reports. Rumors are suggesting your marriage may be one of convenience." The air seemed to freeze solid. Melinda opened her file, pulling out photographs and notes. "We need to verify that this is a genuine family, one in which the child is cared for, loved, and raised in a stable environment. I'll need to ask a few personal questions." Zoe steadied her breathing. Daniel gave her a slight nod. "Melinda began. How did you two meet?" Zoe answered truthfully, though briefly. "At a wedding mine. It didn't happen. Daniel helped me that day, and everything started from there." Melinda scribbled, her expression unreadable. "How long have you lived here?" "Over 3 months. And during that time, have you and Mr. Whitmore shared a bedroom?" Zoe froze. Daniel leaned forward, his tone deep. "Is that necessary?" "It is," Melinda replied calmly, "because if not, this marriage may be viewed as contractual." Zoe inhaled slowly. She looked at Daniel, who remained calm though his hands tightened slightly. "We sleep in separate rooms," Zoe said. "Because of his daughter. Because of privacy. Because we weren't ready. But that doesn't make this marriage fake." Melinda closed her notebook, gaze steady. "I understand, but the court won't find that convincing. They want to see a family, not just paperwork." Just then, Eva came bounding down the stairs, her hair loose, clutching her teddy bear. "Miss Zoe, I finished my rose drawing." Melinda smiled thinly. "Hello, Evangeline. You like living here?" Eva nodded, holding Zoe's hand. "I love it. Miss Zoe tells me stories every night." "And who do you love more, Mr. Whitmore or Miss Zoe?" Eva paused, her small face caught between confusion and honesty. "Both," she whispered, "because they're my home." Melinda hesitated for a second, then closed her folder. "I'll submit my report within 2 weeks. But I'll be honest, things don't look favorable for you right now." She shook hands curtly and left. The door closed, leaving the house heavy with silence. Zoe turned to Daniel, heart pounding. "She thinks we're pretending." "She's right," Daniel said quietly. Zoe's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "No, Zoe." He looked up, voice firm. "She's right, not because this marriage is fake, but because we haven't lived it." Zoe said nothing. "She saw 2 people sharing a house," Daniel continued, "not a family. We haven't shown her what we really are." Her throat tightened. "So what do you want me to do? Pretend? Kiss you in front of them?" Daniel shook his head. "No. I want you actually to be with me. Not as a contract. Not for show the way you are with Eva." Something in his tone made her look at him longer than she meant to. Afternoon light poured through the window, gilding his tired but honest face, and for the first time, she saw not calculation but fear. Fear of losing what he'd come to love. That evening, rain began to fall softly. Eva refused to sleep. She sat by the window, clutching her pillow, eyes glistening. "Miss Zoe," she whispered, "will they take me away?" Zoe froze. Then she gathered the girl into her arms. "No, sweetheart. No one's taking you anywhere." "But that lady said if you and Uncle aren't real." Zoe pressed her hand to the child's cheek. "Then we'll make them believe. By being real." The words echoed in Zoe's mind long after Eva fell asleep. She was still awake by midnight, listening to the soft rain tapping against the glass. Finally, she rose, slipped on her robe, and walked down the hallway. Light spilled from beneath Daniel's door. She knocked gently. "Come in," his rough, tired voice answered. He sat at his desk, shadows under his eyes, surrounded by papers and silence. Zoe stepped closer, her voice low. "You were right. We've never really lived this." He looked up, his eyes searching hers. "Are you saying—" "Yes," she cut in softly. "I'll move into your room, not for Melinda Green, not for the case, but because I don't want Eva growing up in a house where 2 adults act like strangers." Daniel was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." Zoe smiled faintly, though her eyes shimmered. "Don't thank me. We're doing what's right for her, and maybe for us." That night, she packed a small suitcase, just clothes, a few books, and her courage. Daniel's room was warm, scented faintly of oak and mint. He stood as she entered, reaching for an extra blanket. "I'll take the couch," he said quietly. "No," Zoe replied gently but firmly. "You don't have to. We're adults. I trust you." He looked at her, surprise, gratitude, and something deeper flickering in his eyes. Zoe lay down on the far side of the bed, her back turned, listening to the rhythm of the rain mixing with his steady breathing. Neither spoke, but in the quiet between them, something unspoken shifted. No longer an arrangement, no longer a role to play. Just two people, both once broken, beginning at last to believe that love could start not from promises or paper, but from trust. That morning, Savannah woke without sunlight. The sky hung low and pale grey, and the wind drifting from the river carried a chill of damp air. Zoe opened her eyes early, hearing only a few birds outside and then realizing it was too quiet. No laughter, no sound of small feet running down the hall like every morning. Something felt wrong. She sat up quickly, heart racing. Eva's door was wide open. The bed is empty. On the pillow lay a small, folded note written in uneven, slanted handwriting. "Miss Zoe, I'm sorry for lying. I heard them say your marriage isn't real, that you and Uncle only stay together so I can stay here. I don't want anyone to pretend because of me anymore. I'm going back to Mama's rose garden. I love you. Eva." Zoe froze. The paper trembled in her shaking hand as a chill ran down her spine. Just as Daniel came down the stairs, she bolted out of the room, shirt wrinkled, hair disheveled. "Zoe?" She handed him the note, her voice breaking. "She's gone." Daniel's eyes darkened instantly. He said nothing, clenched the paper so hard it crumpled in his fist. "Call the police," he said, "and the security team, everyone." Zoe's hands felt numb. "Daniel," she wrote, "she's going to her mother's rose garden." His face went pale. "That's the old Whitmore estate, where the accident happened." 10 minutes later, the rain began. It started as a mist, then fell hard, drumming against the windshield as they sped down the road. Zoe clutched a wet map in her lap, tears blurring her vision. "She's terrified of thunder, Daniel. If lightning strikes, she'll hide." He cut in, his voice like iron. "She always hides somewhere safe." The car skidded to a stop at the rusted gates of the abandoned Whitmore property. Ivy crawled over the metal, and the sign leaned crooked in the wind. They pushed through and ran mud splashing up their legs, rain soaking them. "Eva!" Zoe shouted, her voice raw. "Eva, where are you?" Only the rain answered. Daniel sprinted toward the old greenhouse where his sister-in-law once grew roses. He shoved open the door. Dust and leaves are scattered in the wind. Empty. Then Zoe saw small footprints in the mud, leading toward the back of the garden. "Daniel," she cried, "here." They followed the trail to the ancient oak tree, where a tiny treehouse still stood, weathered and covered in moss. A dim glow flickered inside. Zoe tilted her head up. "Eva," a small voice answered, trembling. "Miss Zoe, please stop pretending." Zoe's throat tightened. "I'm not pretending, sweetheart. I was terrified for you, but they said you'll leave when the case is over." Daniel stepped forward, drenched to the bone. "Eva," he called softly, "listen to me. I was wrong. I should have told you everything." Thunder rumbled in the distance. The air smelled of rain and roses. Zoe looked up, tears mixing with raindrops. "Honey, can you come down? It's slippery, I'm afraid you'll fall." "No. If I come down, you have to tell the truth." Zoe nodded. Her voice shook. "I promise. I will." There was a pause, then the small door creaked open. Eva peeked out, hair soaked, eyes wide and glistening. "Do you love Uncle Daniel?" she asked. The question froze both adults. Zoe turned to Daniel. His gaze was locked on hers. One heartbeat. Two. Then she whispered, clear as the wind through rain, "Yes, I love him. I don't know when it started, but I do." Eva began to sob loud, gasping sobs that carried every ounce of fear she'd been holding. Daniel climbed up, wrapped her in his arms, and carried her down. Zoe opened her arms and pulled them both close. Rain and tears and thunder merged into one. The three of them stayed there, clinging to each other beneath the storming Georgia sky. By the time they returned home, night had fallen. Golden light spilled from the windows, reflecting off Eva's damp hair as she rested against Zoe's chest. Daniel knelt beside them with a towel, gently drying the little girl's hair. "Don't ever do that again, Eva," he whispered. "I almost lost you." Eva's voice was small, trembling. "I was scared. I didn't want her to leave." Zoe brushed a tear from the child's cheek and smiled through her own. "I'm not going anywhere, I promise." Daniel watched them, his wife and his niece, wrapped in warmth and light. He sat down beside them and said softly, "Eva, listen to me. Miss Zoe isn't just my wife on paper. She's the reason this house finally feels like home." Eva rubbed her eyes. "So, she'll stay with us forever?" Daniel looked at Zoe, his voice steady and tender. "If she wants to." Zoe met his eyes, her heart trembling. "And you, do you want that?" Daniel smiled a quiet, genuine smile. "I want it. Every day. Every night. For the rest of my life." No more words were needed. Zoe leaned her head on his shoulder, Eva curled between them, safe and warm. Outside, the rain still fell, but inside, their hearts beat together for the first time. The next morning, sunlight returned. Golden rays spilled across the floor, where the three still lay tangled beneath one blanket. Eva woke first, giggled softly, and whispered, "Miss Zoe, it's sunny again." Zoe opened her eyes and smiled. "It is, sweetheart." She turned to look at Daniel, still asleep, breathing evenly, peace written across his face, and she whispered to herself, "No one has to pretend anymore." The morning sky over Savannah was impossibly clear and blue. After the storm, the whole city seemed washed clean, sunlight glinting off old rooftops, the air crisp and new. Zoe woke early. She stood before the mirror, smoothing the pale blue dress Daniel had picked for her, simple, graceful. Today was the day that would decide everything. The day the Georgia State Court would determine whether Evangeline Whitmore could stay in the place she called home. Downstairs, Daniel was fastening his tie. The light caught his grey eyes, calm, but no longer cold. He turned when he heard her steps. "Ready?" Zoe nodded softly. "Are you?" He smiled, that rare, quiet smile. "I've got the two strongest girls in the world beside me. I think I am." Eva ran up, wrapping her arms around Zoe. "Miss Zoe, you promise you won't let them take me away?" Zoe knelt, pressing her forehead to the child's. "I promise. And you promise me you'll never stop believing in love?" Eva nodded, her bright eyes reflecting the morning light. The three of them left the house together. The iron gates of the Whitmore estate opened into a garden bursting with roses. As the car rolled down the drive, Zoe looked out the window, the rose petals trembling in the wind, and wondered if they, too, were breathing a sigh of relief. The Chatham County Courthouse was crowded. Reporters, lawyers, and the Blake family, Eva's maternal relatives, filled the room. Zoe held Eva's hand tightly. Daniel stood beside them, composed but silent. Their attorney presented evidence of stability, of home, of love. Then Helena Blake rose to speak, the late mother's mother, thin, elegant voice sharp as glass. "Daniel Whitmore is a good man," she said evenly, "but not a father. He knows how to provide, not how to nurture. And his marriage to this woman, it's a facade." Whispers rippled through the courtroom. Zoe felt her heart twist painfully, but Daniel remained steady. He rose and walked to the witness stand. His voice was low but carried strength. "Mrs. Blake is right about one thing," he began. "I'm not Eva's biological father, but I'm the man who pulled her from the wreckage. The one who learned to braid her hair, tell her stories, make her milk, and stay up all night when she was sick. I'm not perfect, but I've never walked away." He paused, then turned towards Zoe. "As for this marriage, yes, it began as an arrangement. But tell me, who can say love can't begin with an agreement if two people choose to stay?" The room fell utterly silent. Daniel drew a breath. "I married her to win custody, but I kept her because I can't live without her. And if you want proof," he looked straight at Zoe, "she is the proof. She made a house into a home. She turned a man who lived by logic into someone terrified of losing what matters. Zoe's throat tightened. She didn't mean to cry, but the tears came anyway. The opposing lawyer rose. "Your Honor, emotion isn't legal evidence." The elderly judge leaned forward. "No, but sometimes emotion is the only thing that gives the law meaning." Then he turned to Zoe. "Mrs. Whitmore, would you like to say something?" Zoe stood, her knees trembling, but her voice clear. "I once stood at an altar and watched my dream shatter. I thought marriage was about signatures, not hearts. But when I came to the Whitmore house, I met a child who needed love, and a man who was afraid to give it. They taught me that love doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be real." She faced Helena Blake. "You're right. I'm not Eva's mother by blood, but I chose her every morning, every night with my whole heart. And if that isn't enough, then all I ask from this court is one more chance to love her longer." The room held its breath. The judge lowered his head, leafing through the papers. Helena looked at Zoe for a long moment, then said quietly, "I never meant to take her away. I didn't want her to grow up without a mother." Zoe's eyes glistened. "She won't. She has one now." By late afternoon, after a short recess, the judge returned. His voice was solemn, deliberate. "After reviewing all evidence and testimony, the court grants full custody of Evangeline Whitmore to Daniel and Zoe Whitmore." Eva burst into tears and ran into their arms. Zoe held her tight, laughter and sobs blending into one. Daniel bent his head and whispered, "Thank you." Outside the courthouse, sunlight spilled across the marble steps. Zoe looked up the sky over Savannah blazed gold, and a flock of seagulls cut through it like white ribbons. She took Daniel's hand. "It's over." He smiled softly. "No, it's just beginning." Eva slipped her small hands into theirs and shouted with pure joy, "We're a real family now." Zoe laughed through her tears. Daniel leaned down and kissed the top of Eva's head. "Yes, sweetheart," he said. "Real." That evening, the house smelled of rain and roses. The garden shimmered under the sunset, every petal catching the golden light. Zoe sat on the porch, watching the day fade. Daniel joined her, bringing 2 cups of tea. "Remember the first day we met?" he asked. "How could I forget? I was the abandoned bride, and you were the madman who wanted to marry her." He chuckled. "Mad, yes, but I would have missed the rest of my life if I hadn't been." Zoe looked at him, her eyes glowing in the amber light. "Do you regret it now?" He took her hand, voice rough with emotion. "Not once. Not ever." She smiled softly. "You said you needed a woman, and I needed a home. But maybe what we both really needed was real love." Daniel touched her face and kissed her slow, deep, gentle as the autumn wind. Eva's laughter came from the garden, bright as wind chimes. Above them, the Savannah sky turned honey gold, reflecting over the blooming roses. Zoe closed her eyes, feeling her heart beat in time with the two beside her. A chapter had ended, and another had just begun. In a world where love didn't need to be perfect, only valid, and if you followed Zoe, Daniel, and Eva to this final moment, thank you, honestly, because in a world that rushes past, you took a moment to listen to a story without magic, about 3 people learning to love, to trust, and to stay. And if, like Zoe, you've ever been left behind, or afraid to love again, remember, happiness doesn't come from finding someone perfect, but from daring to open your heart one more time. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, hit subscribe, leave a comment, and tell me which part of their story touched you most. Because maybe, in the next one, you'll find a piece of yourself in the rain of Savannah, in a smile, or in a hand that finally, gently, holds yours.